Today's lesson is going to be on the constitutional militia, which doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a constitutional militia. If you're running around out in the woods threatening the government, you are an insurgent. You are not a militia member. The Constitution does not define the militia. The Constitution doesn't define it because the founders thought everybody already knew what it was. That would be like defining an apple. And pretty much everybody knew what an apple was at the time. And everyone was assumed to be literate because it wasn't that uncommon for people to be able to read for themselves. If you want to quote the Second Amendment saying, well, the Second Amendment's in the Constitution, therefore the Second Amendment defines militia, it does not. All the Second Amendment does is acknowledge the existence of the militia. There is a militia, but there's no such thing as a constitutional militia. Let's talk about definitions. To redefine a word doesn't mean that when someone a long time ago said that word, it means something different than what they intended. For instance, in the Second Amendment, talking about the militia, does not mean a bunch of guys who protest and fight against the government and go take over some stupid wildlife refuge. That's not a militia. To call themselves patriots and the militia does not mean they are a militia. They are insurgents. Insurgents are the people who fight the United States government. They put themselves in a position where they would have to fight. They are not militia, regardless of what they call themselves. They cannot call themselves a hamburger and therefore become a hamburger. Because the founders didn't define the militia, I guess it's been open to interpretation as to what that is, except they did, just not in the Constitution. We seem to have forgotten what the militia is. And in calling a bunch of rednecks running around in the woods, or in Arizona, a bunch of jerks running around the desert pretending like they're doing some good for somebody, a militia is absolutely wrong. They might be survivalists. I've seen them. They're probably insurgents, especially if they have plans to fight the U.S. government or act on those plans. But just because they forgot what the militia was doesn't mean that the name militia has any different meaning. So for them, for the people who claim to be militia but aren't really militia, I'm going to do this. The militia. I'm going to use scare quotes because this is what the militia is now, not what the militia is supposed to be. I'm going to refer to my notes for this part. The purpose of the militia in colonial times and early American history served as in place of a standing army to repel and discourage foreign invasion. I'm pretty sure these idiots taking over the federal building were not fighting back against any kind of foreign invasion. If we've been invaded, that's news to me. So you can go ahead and comment down below. Let me know where we've been invaded and exactly which invaders they were fighting. The militia in early American history served to augment the sheriffs, just like they do now. You ever hear of a sheriff's posse? The posse is drawn from the militia, from the people. So they augmented the sheriffs. They were called up by the sheriffs in time of trouble. And they're still as numerous as the male citizens. They were expected to act as posse comitatus, which means that they would pursue criminals, prevent crime just by their sheer number. So they augmented the sheriffs. They were called up by the sheriffs in time of trouble. And they're still as numerous as the male citizens. They're expected to act as posse comitatus, which means that they would pursue criminals, prevent crime just by their sheer numbers, and all of which were better than a standing army. Having a militia has always been better than having a standing army. Why? Well, the militia didn't have to be fed when they weren't fighting. When the militia were just out and amongst the people, they had the regular jobs. They were carpenters, they were shipwrights, they were iron workers, they were farmers, they did whatever they regularly did. They didn't have to be fed the whole time. Instead of our huge budget that we're spending on a standing army now. A standing army has to be kept busy, otherwise they get into trouble. I know, I served as a U.S. Marine. Idle hands, we had them all the time. We were bored out of our minds. Standing army has to be paid. Otherwise, why would they even bother sticking around? The militia was paid when they served, but only when they served. If there was no war, they could do their regular jobs. Standing army has to be disciplined, and because they're bored, they're going to get into trouble. It happens. The militia existed and was supported in order to prevent the United States government, the federal government, from building a standing army. The colonists had just escaped from a standing army. They had just fought the Revolutionary War against the King of Britain to stomp his standing army and get them out of here. The states did not want a standing army. They were afraid that a standing army would be turned against them. The militia, therefore, being well armed, would secure a free state. By the way, if you think you're in a militia and you're here to serve the United States, the country as a whole, you are wrong. The militia is a state organization. You're here to serve your state. A little bit more detail on what the militia is. From 10 U.S. Code, Section 311, that actually defines what the militia is. The militia of the United States consists of all able-bodied males at least 17 years of age and, except as provided in Section blah, 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 under 45 years of age who have made a declaration of intent to become citizens or who have made a declaration of intent to become citizens of the United States and of female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. Okay, you know what? They forgot. The National Guard is not the militia. Never has been. Why? Because the National Guard falls under the federal government. A state militia cannot be called up by the federal government to serve in a standing army. The National Guard becomes part of the standing army whenever the president says so. 10 U.S. Code, Section 311 breaks it down a little bit more. The militia are, 1. The organized militia, which consists of the National Guards and the Naval Militia. Well, we know that's incorrect, because that's not what the founders intended. And 2. The unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or the Naval Militia. So who is the unorganized militia? That's everybody else. Everybody. When you go to 7-Eleven, it's the guy behind the counter. When you get your tire changed, it's a guy who changed your tire or the gal who changed your tire. It's every single citizen who is not an active member of a militia. And you know what? There's only one state that actually has a militia. Salute to Texas, who actually has their Texas State Guard. Other states actually have a militia defined, and they have one member, their general. But unless there's an emergency that happens, the general does not activate the militia, does not call up the members and muster them to service. 32 U.S. Code, Section 313, unless a person is a former member of the regular Army, regular Navy, regular Air Force, regular Marine Corps, the maximum age that you can be called up is 45. It's 45 if you've never served in the military. It's 64, the maximum age. You must be less than 64 to be called up to the militia. Let's not get sideways on that one, though. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It does not say the right of the militia. It says the right of the people. The people is who that right belongs to, and it does not grant a right. It recognizes a right that already existed. You can keep trying to redefine it, Democrats, but it's not going to work. The truth is against you. Now, a little bit of history on the word militia. How early was it used that we can actually look it up and see what it actually meant? Well, let's talk about the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were 85 essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. If you don't know who those people are, I'm sorry that public education has failed you. Please look it up. They were all written under the pen name Publius and published in New York newspapers in 1787 and 1788. They are considered by most historians as the most important source of information regarding the intent of the Constitution. These are the people who helped form our Constitution, which, by the way, was our second founding document. The Articles of Confederation were the first. That was a failure, so then the Constitution had to be written. Look it up. Federalist Paper number 29 says the appointment of militia officers was the responsibility of the state. Therefore, a militia must be willing to submit to the command of the state-appointed officer. The militia supports the state and therefore is subject to the state. Therefore, anybody who lived in Oregon, who fought the government in Oregon, is an insurgent. There's no other way to say it. If you fought your own government, you were not supporting your state. Therefore, you are an insurgent. You are the enemy. And Lavoy Finicum died a criminal. But I'm not sad that Lavoy Finicum got shot when he challenged police officers to shoot him and swore he would never go to jail. He'd rather die. He got exactly what he wanted, and he got exactly what he deserved. Since the responsibility to assign officers lies with the state, if you call yourself a commander and you're part of a militia, you are incorrect. If you give yourself whatever rank you give yourself, captain, general, lieutenant, and it's an officer rank, you are incorrect. You cannot appoint officers. It's the state's responsibility. However, there's no mention of enlisted ranks. So I have to concede. If your militia just consists of enlisted ranks, you might be right. So long as you're doing nothing but training and you have no plans, you do not take action against your government. Now some people might say, oh, but my state does not provide any kind of training. They don't provide any weapons. Well, first of all, they were never supposed to provide weapons. That's what the Second Amendment is for, so you can buy your own damn weapons. That's why the Second Amendment exists, so you can buy your own weapons and bring them to war with you if you have to. The training regimen is supposed to be run by the state. However, if they don't do it, it falls on us to train ourselves. So if your militia exists, does not have any officers, no one even calls himself an officer or a commander, and just exists to train, you might be all right. So long as you do not fight your government. George Mason said, I ask, sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people, except for a few public officials. Therefore, if you are serving as a public official in any capacity whatsoever, you cannot call yourself militia.